A warm welcome to all of you. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Paul Becker. I'm a director of the Office of the Secretary General. And I welcome you. Please have a seat. There's plenty of seats. Please feel comfortable. And I welcome you to this Security Day event on a human rights-centered approach to technology and security. And I do so on behalf of Secretary General Thomas Gremminger, our host. Where is he? Well, he is delayed on a flight from Geneva, but he's on his way. He landed at 9:30. We may reorder some things, but he will be present very soon. And I also would welcome especially those who attend an OSCE event for the very first time. And it's good that you're here. Very warm welcome. And also welcome to those who are watching online via live stream on the OSCE website or on Facebook, which is a positive use of technology. Welcome to you. Whether here in person or online, please follow the conversation on Twitter and use the hashtag @SecurityDays. I'll wait a second because people are looking for equipment. Take your time. And while you do so, let me share with you that last night I Googled to find out what exactly is the role of an MC. And in Wikipedia, it's WikiHow actually, I found out, it says the following. First, keep everyone updated on what is happening at the event, which makes perfect sense. The second thing says keeping the event on time, also makes sense. And then the third part, and I'll quote, remember to smile. Smiling reinforces the fun and light-hearted ambience of the event and makes you appear to be an enthusiastic MC. So, yes, I'll smile. And Walter Kemp, head of the Strategic Policy Support Unit, will be moderating this event. So Walter, this is your heads up. Now let's get back to rule 1. Everybody is seated. Inform everyone on what's happening on the event. I have 3 points to share with you. You will find the agenda, the concept notes, and the biographies of our speakers and moderators in your information packets, and it's also online. Second point, on the formats of today's proceedings. We start with welcoming and keynote remarks, followed by 4 thematic sessions and a wrap-up by the Secretary General at the end of the day. Good morning, Philip. The idea of Security Days is to have a very informal exchange. So we'll try to leave time at the end of each session for your questions and comments. And in the spirit of an interactive discussion, I would encourage those who want to take the floor to avoid prepared statements and focus on dialogue and discussions. And you'll see there's microphones, plenty, and there's also my colleagues walking around with mics. So if you're somewhere seated in the middle, just wave your hand. We have coffee breaks at 12 and at 3:45, and the lunch at 1:30 in the afternoon. They're in the Voorzaal, the large room just outside here. And coffee and lunch breaks will provide opportunities for even more informal exchanges of views. And I would also like to invite you to stay a few minutes, if you so like, after the final session, after the wrap-up, for some casual drinks. It's a last chance to interact with speakers, with guests, and amongst yourselves. Rule number 2, keeping the event on time, and that is the challenge today, so please bear with me and with the MC this afternoon. The program is tight, so we'll try to keep on schedule. And I appeal in advance to our moderators and our speakers to respect the time limits, and I urge you all to be on time for the beginning of each session. And when sessions are about to start, we will use some highly sophisticated technology to get your attention, which is a small handbell. Now, I would also like to take the opportunity to thank our main sponsors, the Czech government, Ambassador Ivo Schramek and his team, and the Netherlands government, Ambassador Bunder and his team, for making this possible, because without you, we wouldn't have been able to do so. And also thanks to those sponsors who made travel for some moderators and speakers possible. Thank you. Now, then we go to the very first part of the event. I would like to welcome three key figures in the OSCE. Well, four, if I add Dunya, who has been with us for a couple of years, who now has a different, very important position. I would like to welcome Ambassador Thomas Gemminger, who is coming a little bit later, and, of course, Ambassador Radomir Boac, and Ingeborg Solrun Gisladottir, who is the Director of the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights. I would suggest, and I would like to invite Director Gisladottir first, to be followed immediately by Ambassador Boac. Ambassador Boac is the permanent representative to the OSCE and the chair of the Permanent Council, representing the 2019 Slovak chairmanship of the OSCE. So, dear Ingeborg, may I ask you to take the floor? Please.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, it is a pleasure and an honor to be here for the annual OSCE Security Days. I would like to thank the organizers for the diligent work in bringing about such forward-looking meeting, also including ODIHR in this work. But allow me also to thank them for rearranging the meeting room here. It's really a pleasure to participate in a meeting in this setting, so I would like to really thank them for that. But today's discussion is timely and much overdue in the context of the OSCE. Our organization's raison d'etre is to enhance the comprehensive approach to security. One aspect of that is to analyze and reflect on new opportunities and emerging challenges, to harness the former, that's to say the opportunities, and try to find bold solutions to the latter, to the challenges. The concept note for this meeting provides an overview of the challenges that current and emerging technologies present to the human dimension, such as human rights. I'm sure that all speakers and participants will address those in detail today. I would also like to share with you some considerations and proposals that emerge from the work ODIHR does where technology meets human rights. First and foremost, we should recognize that technology in itself is neutral. The way we use it may, on the other hand, not be neutral. This has been true throughout human history. Consider, for example, the invention of the wheel, the steam engine, or the harnessing of the power of the atom. This is, of course, all neutral per se, but can be used in both positive and negative ways. Similarly, digital technologies can be employed both to protect and promote human rights and also to undermine and violate human rights. It is our choice that will determine the outcome. With that in mind, let's look at some of the benefits that digital technologies have given us. Social media platforms and communications applications are already old tech, as our children or even grandchildren might say. The almost instantaneous ability to communicate and mobilize has allowed civil society to coalesce around issues, claim human rights, garner public support, and even fundraise or create new associative forms, all to the benefit of democracy and human rights. We have seen social media play a positive role in enabling the freedom of assembly and association. In many instances, social media is critical to the formation of an assembly via messaging applications, visual recordings, or live streaming. But social media has also been used in a negative manner. It has been used to traffic human beings, and it has served as a hotbed for organizations that promote terrorism and violent radicalization. Social media is used to spread disinformation and hate. Those who propagate violence against women are increasingly using technology to do so. Like social media, emerging technologies such as, I say emerging technologies because it's no longer maybe so much emerging, it's not new things, such as artificial intelligence, facial recognition, data mining, and automation also present both benefits for humanity and increased challenges. Artificial intelligence, facial recognition, satellite imagery, intelligent-led financial investigations, and web-based training curriculums can help to proactively combat trafficking of women, men, and children, and to counter violent extremism and terrorism. My office is actively assisting authorities to enhance their capabilities to these ends. We are also leveraging digital technologies to scale up our own interventions. For example, we are developing innovative mobile-based tools that allow us to reach significantly more human rights defenders and build their capacity on topics such as human rights monitoring and digital security, so they can be trained through the mobile-based tools and don't have to come in person necessarily to get the training. We have made significant progress in supporting human rights defenders and contributing to building an enabling environment in which they feel safe and can help the people whose rights they defend. ODIHR has recently built an online digital tool that enables civil society to record and monitor hate crimes and hate incidents. This tool will collect systematic data from across the OSCE region, helping civil society and communities to monitor hate crimes and promote tolerance and non-discrimination. Observing new voting technologies is already an integral part of ODIHR's work. We continue to employ digital tools to strengthen election observation processes and enhance cybersecurity where digital means are used in elections. We also recognize that technologies are instrumental in advancing democratic governance. They can enhance information sharing, facilitate political engagement, encourage public participation in the lawmaking process, and advance transparency and accountability. Nevertheless, these same emerging digital technologies raise serious concerns. We are particularly concerned about the use and abuse of surveillance-enhancing technologies. For example, facial recognition allows authorities to identify and in some cases act against participants and organizers of peaceful assemblies, even after an assembly has come to an end. OSCE participating states are increasingly using new technologies and systems to fight serious crime and terrorism to manage borders. This includes the use of biometrics, electronic surveillance, and sometimes untargeted mass information collection, which connects an individual to stored information which may be shared between states. Yet the same technologies are used in some cases alongside anti-terrorism legislation to suppress human rights defenders, harass and silence political opposition, and repress the civil and political rights of citizens at large. ODIHR is concerned by the efforts of some states to regulate, filter, and block online content that is protected speech. This includes the increasing use of internet shutdowns to silence legitimate concerns about electoral processes or to otherwise restrict freedom of expression. We also need to reflect on the effects of automation. Data shows that in advanced and emerging economies, automation is most responsible for the disappearance of skilled and unskilled jobs. This development puts enormous economic pressure on communities worldwide and can fuel political instability. Ladies and gentlemen, so how do we make sure that the technologies we create bring us more benefits? How can we reduce or eliminate the harm they may cause? The OSCE should engage with the technology companies that create these innovations. We must work with businesses to make sure that their tools enhance human security and human rights rather than undermine them, and that men and women benefit equally from this. I believe it is in the interest of all states to come to agreement about the use of the digital space. History has shown that when states adopt a rule book to guide their interactions, this can decrease the risk of conflict and improve conditions for peace and security. OSCE Human Dimension commitments provide a frame on which we can build. But this rulebook does not exist when it comes to the digital space. Returning to what I mentioned at the beginning, the choice lies with us. As we become more immersed in technology, we must choose to find common ground in the best interests of everyone in the OSCE region and beyond. Thank you so much.
Good morning, dear colleagues. I would like just to thank, first of all, the organizers of this get-together. The security days are an essential part of our organization. I think also that the topic is really very well known for everybody, and we are facing the consequences on the daily basis. I am very great and proud just to be in that prominent company with the director, dear Ingebjörg, with the commissioner, the Dunya, and I hope that the Secretary General will join us very soon in a couple of minutes. You already noticed that the Slovak chairmanship is spending quite a lot of energy on the second dimension, and the part of the second dimension is also the digitalization. But also we have to admit that digitalization is not only the second dimension, but this is the cross-dimensional issue. We are closely connected to what is happening outside the Vienna bubble, and we have also to admit that we are just feeling the impact of digitalization on the daily basis. We are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, but we are also facing now the first hints of the fifth industrial revolution, with all the consequences, with all the huge impact. The globalization is also the phenomenon we are facing, and all those factors, everything together, they are reshaping today's world. They are just bringing the new challenges, they are creating the new economic models, and also they are changing the consumption behavior. They are changing our societies from inside. The impact from outside is really huge, and we still don't know how to face. A good example was a discussion on the smart cities as an impact of the Industrial Revolution and also digitalization we have in Prague during the Economic Environmental Forum. I think it was a very good end-time side event. I dare to say that technologies are evolving and spreading so quickly, so all sorts of platforms, they have often outgrown the control of its creators. Digital technologies are reaching farther into society and economy with more connectivity, faster integration, with everyday life activities, less privacy, and this will demand a response from all stakeholders. Slovak chairmanship strongly believes that the OSCE is well placed to address the opportunities and security challenges connected with digital transformation and help the participating states to find ways to increase cooperation in this area from the perspective of all dimensions, including human. You all know that every and each chairmanship is just selling and trying just to pursue its priorities, and maybe the priority number one, besides the conflict prevention, multilateralism, it's the people. And it's somehow also today's topic is linked not to our priority, but it should be the priority to all participating states. Given the OSCE mission to promote sustainable economic growth and foster international economic cooperation to counter such challenges, the Italian chairmanship has last year opened in the OSCE the topic of digital transformation and its influence on the development on human capital in the OSCE area. The expert discussion and consequently adopted decision in Milan was a significant contribution to the OSCE perception and deeper understanding of this important topic. So I think, Alessandro, that you did a very, very good job and in the right direction. It was very timely. Fourth industrial revolution is also changing the very nature of work and impacting the labor market by changing the dynamic between talents and skills. However, unless these developments are well understood and the process of transformation well managed, there is a risk that such economic disruption may lead to increased illegal economic activity and other factors that can undermine security and stability in the OSCE region, and not only in the OSCE region. It was my favorite topic when I was doing my PhD and I was reading the books of Professor Harari from University of Jerusalem, and he was also mentioning that despite the appearance of many new human jobs, we might nevertheless witness the rise of new useless class. We might actually get the worst of both worlds, suffering simultaneously from high unemployment and a shortage of skilled labor. So the topic of digital transformation is also high on the agenda of EU, no doubt about it. Maybe we could recall the Council conclusion from June 2019. I don't want just to go in details what's going on the EU and the UN. There are a couple of decisions, but we have just to try the ways how to make the new technologies safer, more useful, less harmless, and how to generate a positive social impact and decrease the danger they could pose for our future in the OSCE region. Let's try to find together the best ways how to enhance the digital governance, promote guidelines for the ethical and socially beneficial use of emerging ICT in our societies, promote safer technologies, more useful and inclusive, with included gender perspective, in order to generate a positive impact on society. To achieve these goals, we have to strengthen the cooperation in the fields of research and science to foster green and sustainable growth, to address growing privacy and security risk, and strengthen the cooperation on harnessing the efficiency gains that come with emerging technologies in the environmental and energy fields. We strongly believe that the digital transformation should be human-centered or human-oriented, which correspond to one of the main priorities of our chairmanship. We hope that the continuation of the OSCE debate on these important topics will advance pragmatic and effective cooperation in these important areas. The topic of digital transformation is high, as I said, on the agenda of UN, OECD, and each organization is approaching this topic from its own perspective, and so should the OSCE. We have the toolbox, we have our experience, we have the knowledge, and I think we have also intellectual capacity to face this challenge. And we cannot act alone. We are 57 participating states, plus 11 working closely with us. We are also inviting, I'm talking about the chairmanship, the participating states to support the creation of the institutional frameworks, regional and national strategies and plans to facilitate the positive effects of digital transformation and address the geographical and geographic gap, gender inequality it is creating, support e-government and environmentally friendly solutions and digital connectivity. We would also like to ask the OSCE to continue to work on digital e-learning platforms to share the OSCE experience. We try to stay in the second dimension. Also, it's not easy because all of you understand that digital transformation is a cross-dimensional issue and human dimension is one of the most important. We have to look for the ways to foster sustainable and green growth, how to promote structural adjustment of our activities and research to meet the 21st century challenges. We hope that the continuation of the OSCE debate on these important topics will advance pragmatic and effective cooperation in these important areas forward and will foster the exchange of experience and knowledge, as well as an increase in trust between the participating states. Let us show that we are willing and able to act together to advance the interest, security and prosperity of our citizens. And the finishing line is that if you like or not, we are not only facing now the fourth or the fifth industrial revolution is just beyond our door. We have just to face it together. Individual approach is extremely risky, and we have just to find a platform also for our organization how to face it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Ingeborg, and thank you, Ambassador Di Rado, for both your impressive remarks. It's food for thought. Let me just also use the opportunity. Does everybody hear well? Is the sound coming through all sides? All right, good, thanks. I'm very happy to welcome the Secretary General. I know you got up. You might need some equipment here. You did get up very early this morning, I know, to make it on time. And, well, you're a victim of the delays, many strikes with the airlines. We're very happy you're here. I introduced you this morning. I mentioned you're the host, and I would really welcome your remarks. Secretary General.
Commissioner Mladenovic, dear Dunya, dear Rado, dear Ingeborg, Excellencies, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Welcome to this Security Days event on a human rights-centered approach to technology and security. I'm very pleased to see such a diverse group of participants drawn from not only the OSCE family, but also our partners in other international organizations, civil society, business, and academia. So thank you so much, you all, for coming. We chose this topic because of the Slovak chairmanship's focus on the fourth industrial revolution. Also, a number of ambassadors suggested that we look at issues related to the human dimension of security. The digital domain is now at the forefront of debates about human rights, democracy, and security. We also noticed the growing impact of technology on the work of OSCE executive structures, for better or for worse. So it seemed logical to take a closer look at the implications of new technologies for human rights and for security. As a result, and in close consultation with the institutions and the Parliamentary Assembly, as well as with different units in the Secretariat, we have put together a very interesting program. We will look at the benefits and the risks of technology, taking a human rights-centered approach to rapid technological change. We will also discuss what lessons we can take away from this for the OSCE's work. Younger generations are increasingly paying attention to new technologies. At the OSCE Perspectives 23rd Youth Forum in Bratislava last week, I witnessed how young participants discussed the advantages that new technologies can bring, but also the potential risk they might pose to security in the OSCE area. And I'm delighted that one of those experts, Katarina Kertisova, will participate in the final panel this afternoon. Dear colleagues, Security Days is designed to be different than most OSCE meetings here in the Hofburg. It should be more interactive and provocative, and because of that, it should bring new ideas to our work. So I would encourage you to take part actively, to ask questions, to share experiences, and to provide suggestions. The success of this event depends to a great extent on the quality of our speakers and moderators. And the good news is that we have a great lineup today. So I would like to thank in advance all our panelists and moderators who have accepted to speak today. We look forward to hearing from you. Special thanks to Commissioner Mladenovic, the former OSCE representative on the freedom of the media and currently the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights. So welcome back, Dunya. Dear colleagues, the topic that we are discussing today is all around us. Just look at the impact of the internet, smartphones, and fingerprint or facial recognition software on our lives, our societies, and our work. But do we understand the potential implications of artificial intelligence and big data, or how the collection of massive amounts of personal data could impact us? How do we take advantage of technology to enhance security while safeguarding human rights and human dignity? What is the appropriate role of the OSCE in addressing these issues, based on our comprehensive security concept and our cooperative approach to promoting security across all three dimensions? While these topics are relatively fresh for the OSCE, some may be surprised to learn about the wide range of activities that different parts of the organization are already engaged in that relate to the impact of technology on human rights and security. Allow me to highlight just a few. Criminals are often the first movers when it comes to technical innovation. For example, technology is being misused by human traffickers to recruit, control, and exploit their victims. They not only communicate through the dark web, but also use publicly available applications employing encryption to carry out illicit activity. Cryptocurrencies, for instance, allow criminals to move money anonymously. Terrorist groups are using the internet to recruit followers, finance their activities, disseminate propaganda, and incite people to commit acts of terrorism. Cyber attacks threaten critical infrastructure and can jeopardize privacy and data protection. But technology can be, and is being, used to fight crime, also in the OSCE. Just in the past few months, the Transnational Threats Department's Strategic Police Matters Unit, SPMU, organized a conference in close cooperation with the Slovak Chairmanship and the Austrian Federal Ministry of the Interior on crime in the digital age. The SPMU also supported the Chairmanship in organizing the annual police experts meeting to focus on the use of artificial intelligence in policing. Or look at anti-trafficking efforts. Data aggregation and analysis, blockchain for traceability, artificial intelligence, facial recognition, and monitoring trafficking routes are all examples of our Tech Against Trafficking program. And we will hear more about the OSCE's work in this area later today. Technology can also be used to counter terrorism and to improve border management. For example, biometric systems integrate checks against watch lists and databases in order to compare the travelers' biometric information against known criminals or terrorists. The OSCE plays a role by helping participating states to collect and share biometric data as mandated by UN Security Council Resolution 2396. We also support participating states in developing national capacities to counter the use of the Internet for terrorist purposes, while keeping in mind our commitments to freedom of expression and freedom of the media. Regarding arms control efforts, participating states use the technologies provided by our Conflict Prevention Center to reduce the risk of conflict. Specifically, information is routinely exchanged via the OSCE communications network to increase transparency and to build predictability and trust. Recently, states have also taken it upon themselves to approve the use of the ComsNet to exchange information pertaining to cybersecurity confidence-building measures. We should also not forget the second dimension. At a time of fast-moving digital transformation, we need to take into account both human capital and human rights to minimize the risk of a digital divide. The Milan Ministerial Council decision on human capital development in the digital era gives us something to build on. Technology can also help to reduce risks to the economy and the environment. A newly designed project of the OSCE aims to increase the capacity of participating states to use innovative open data tools and new digital technologies. They can enable governments and civil society to implement open data national commitments. Moreover, OSCE has developed an OSCE e-learning platform that now hosts the first online training course on good governance and anti-corruption. And it will soon also offer a virtual competency and training center for the protection of critical energy networks. The center offers online-based trainings and risk assessments and a common platform for energy professionals and related stakeholders throughout the OSCE area. And this illustrates a potential area of growth for the OSCE, namely capacity building through online tools. One final example to mention is the way technology is contributing to the effectiveness of our field operations. The Special Monitoring Mission to Ukraine is a great example. Since October 2014, the SMM has increasingly used technology to enhance its ability to monitor developments in eastern Ukraine through satellite imagery, UAVs, and fixed surveillance camera systems. This technology has given the mission access where it has been restricted, enabled monitoring at night, and reduced risks to our monitors. This is a good example of how technology enhances security and thus supports the mission's efforts at facilitating responses to ease the humanitarian consequences of the violent conflict. We will hear more about technology in OSCE field operations in session 1. Ladies and gentlemen, while the web can be a dark space, it can also be a safe space. OSCE institutions are also working to that end. ODIHR supports civil society partners seeking greater security. And I'm glad that the ODIHR director, Ingeborg Gisladottir, is with us today, and we look forward to your remarks in a few minutes. The representative on freedom of the media has focused special attention on safety of journalists, and particularly of female journalists online. And the High Commissioner on National Minorities offers guidance on how to create, nurture, and develop the role of the media and information technologies for conflict prevention. The OSCE PA is also doing important work on technology issues, including a recent resolution about digitalization as an advantage for gender policies, sponsored by Stefana Mladenovic, the Special Rapporteur on the Digital Agenda. And I'm delighted that you have joined us today, Stefana. It is indeed very troubling that online forms of violence against women are becoming increasingly common, particularly with the use of social media platforms and other technical applications. A recent study by the OSCE on the well-being and safety of women reveals a disturbing picture of online violence against women and cyberstalking. So, colleagues, there are many interesting topics for us to look at today, as illustrated by the icons that you see on the screen. The questions include: what are the risks? What are the opportunities? Who are the key players? And what kind of partnerships are necessary to cope effectively with developments that do originate largely in the private sector? How can the OSCE adapt to the rapid development of technology in a way that upholds our commonly agreed principles and that furthers the common commitment of our participating states to promote human rights and comprehensive security? This will require innovation and cooperation. In that spirit, I look forward to a thought-provoking and forward-looking exchange of views. In concluding, I would like to remind everyone that security days are dependent on the voluntary contributions of participating states. This event would, quite literally, not be possible without the support of the Czech Republic and the Netherlands, as well as in-kind contributions from Estonia, Canada, Sweden, and Germany. So thank you very much, and thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, Secretary General. Thank you, dear Thomas, for describing the bigger picture and for formulating some key questions. I think all three introductory remarks, the Director made hers, Ambassador, we have more or less set the scene for today. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Dunya Mijatovic, who is a Commissioner for Human Rights, Council of Europe. She's the fourth Commissioner. A national of Bosnia-Herzegovina, she has been working to promote and protect human rights for the past 2 decades, thus acquiring extensive knowledge in the field of international monitoring, in particular as regards freedom of expression. Prior to her appointment as Commissioner for Human Rights, as already mentioned, she has served as OSCE representative on freedom of the media from 2010 to 2017. And I can only add to the Secretary General's remarks, dear Dunya, it's great to have you back. And may I please invite you for your keynote remarks.
Secretary General, Chairman of the Permanent Council, Director of ODIHR, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, it's wonderful to be back. I apologize for a bit of inappropriate behavior while I was here on the stage because I was sending kisses and waving to many of you, but I hope you understand that this is also a special time for me also to see so many of people I work with for so many years, building my career that is now continuing at the Council of Europe. I will try to talk, of course, about the topic, but I will start by saying that 30 years ago, crowds of East Germans crossed the border peacefully and climbed on the Berlin Wall together with West Germans. That symbolic moment, which catalyzed months of civil unrest in Eastern Europe, told the world that a new era has just begun. Why it is important that we remember this? I think it is really important to say that over the past 30 years, our European family has become much bigger, freer, safer, and more democratic. We have certainly come a long way during this recent past, and we need to recognize this. We should not really be shy about talking about all the progress and success. But not far enough we reached. Aggressive nationalism, economic difficulties, and terrorism are fomenting new tensions and polarizations in our society. This is something that our continent has already experienced. What is new is that technological development is being used as an accelerator of these phenomena and elevates their ability to undermine security and the democratic fabric of our society. In an era when humans and machines are living in an ever closer relationship, ensuring that technological developments works for and not against human rights, democracy, and the rule of law is one of the biggest challenges that states must face. Are they facing it in the right way? I will come to that a bit later. Indeed, technology is never neutral. It is very personal because it carries ethical, political, and legal implications. Digital technologies can improve the quality of our lives, increase efficiency, strengthen accountability, and create new opportunities in many key sectors of life like healthcare, education, and employment. And it can, of course, strengthen human rights protection in a variety of ways. But so far, digital developments has mainly turned against users, perpetrated injustices, and restricted people's rights. A case in point is privacy, and I'm sure you will have many discussions today. Large amounts of personal data are collected, with or without our knowledge, and are used to profile us. We provide data on our health, political ideas, and family life without knowing who is going to use this data, how, and why. I'm sure you will discuss also a tool that was introduced, and it's called Pegasus. And I know that there are many friends here who will mention this particular application. It is a spyware created for mobile devices, which transforms a cell phone into a mobile surveillance station. It is being used to spy on journalists and human rights defenders. The spyware gives the attacker the ability to monitor, record, and collect existing and future data. The spyware is also can be remotely activated with a camera and mic to really surveil the target. And this is something that is happening constantly. There are new applications, new gadgets that are actually intruding in our lives in different ways. Another alarming phenomena is a cozy relationship between technology companies and state security agencies, which has grown stronger as part of states' responses to terrorist threats and attacks. And of course, this is something that I mentioned on many occasions in this very room. There is a legitimate right of every government to fight terrorism, extremism, and all existing and real threats that we have in our societies. But at what expense? Not at the expense of human rights. And this is something that I see constantly following many member states of the Council of Europe and beyond in their attempt to legislate, regulate, I would even say over-legislate and over-regulate in order to make our society safer and more secure. And who would challenge this? And why would anybody challenge our security? But we cannot live in a secure society, and we cannot enjoy our life and human rights if the situation is not safe. But we can also not have our human rights fully enjoyed and respected if the security is the main issue and the target of the governments that are really moving hastily forward in legislating and introducing laws that are sometimes adopted overnight, and all in the name of security. And you know this better. I know this because I spent 7 years working in this organization that I respect greatly, and I think it's really important to find a best possible way to tackle issues when it comes to human rights. I know it is difficult sometimes to talk about issues that are quite sensitive and sometimes provocative and controversial in the societies, but we need organizations like the OSCE, like Council of Europe, in order to make sure that our rights are protected. Within the digital revolution, artificial intelligence is probably the sector that has expanded the most, without due regard for human rights. There is a great amount of evidence that women, older people, minority groups, people with disabilities, LGBTI people, and economically disadvantaged persons particularly suffer from discrimination at the hands of biased algorithms. Sometimes artificial intelligence causes harm because developers and users are too confident about the powers of machines. In other cases, however, there are more conscious decisions to use artificial intelligence potential to reinforce stereotypes and consolidate political, social, and economic power in the hands of few. Digital technologies are, in fact, very often used to manipulate public opinion. There is no lack of evidence that disinformation, incitement to hatred, and violence have been propagated by tricking the algorithms of some social media platforms, including by using bots and fake accounts. This has contributed to instilling fear in the population and pushing the frames of anti-democratic movements and extreme right parties, in particular in connection with election or referendum days. We cannot allow this digital Far West to continue. Governments must retake control. The good news is that they do not need to reinvent the wheel. They already have the tools and the knowledge to ensure that technology benefits and enhances human rights protection. But is there enough political will? I leave this question to you. The recommendations on artificial intelligence that I published in May can be used to that purpose. We brought some publications in English and French. It is called Unboxing Artificial Intelligence: 10 Steps to Protect Human Rights. It is very basic, simple publication with do's and don'ts, also with a very short glossary, trying to explain why it is important to protect human rights while embracing the benefits and the new things that the new technologies are bringing in our lives. I also would like to mention something which I find quite important. We hear a lot of negative news about artificial intelligence, and we should be cautious and careful. But at the same time, we should really embrace all these good things that the new technologies are bringing to our lives. How to do this? Again, I'm looking at the states, because they have the responsibility to make it work the best possible way. There are many states moving very fast, putting enormous amounts of funds in artificial intelligence. There are some states just watching and trying to see what will happen. At the same time, the threat is still there. There are already examples when we talk about healthcare, education, employment, that the discrimination is really at the front, and we need to do more. I would like to mention also some areas that are related to what is explained in this booklet or publication from a few months ago. One such area relates to the obligation of governments to ensure that business enterprises abide by human rights standards, and we know how difficult this is. Self-imposed standards can be useful, and severe businesses are already implementing them in good faith. But there are not enough of them. Standards vary across the globe, and voluntary commitments are unlikely to prevent the negative effects of bad business practice on human rights. Since states bear the responsibility, as I already said, to respect, to protect and fulfill every person's human rights, it is their duty to ensure that private companies which design, develop or use artificial intelligence systems do not violate human rights standards. This can happen by engaging more resolutely with tech industries to make them aware of the necessity to incorporate human rights in the design of artificial intelligence systems and push them to assess the human rights impact of these systems. A more inclusive cooperation among state actors, the private sectors, academia, NGOs, the media and citizens groups would greatly help in this sense. And I know that the OSCE is already doing a lot in order to bring all these sectors together, but much more needs to be done. States should also reinforce their monitoring of human rights compliance by artificial intelligence systems and act anytime there is an infringement of these rights. They should strengthen independent oversight and empower national human rights structures to engage in this field too. It is crucial to keep human control and human liability in relation to artificial intelligence. Any other way will not take us in a right direction. Finally, states should promote digital literacy among the population, and in particular in schools, in order to help people understand how the digital world works and recognize when it causes harm. For this to happen, states should invest more in public awareness, training, and education initiatives to develop the competencies of citizens and addresses the knowledge gap. It may be a costly investment, but with a huge democratic return. I know that it is much easier to adopt a law, to introduce new regulation or a bylaw in order to say, yes, we are doing something for our societies. But at which cost? And this is something that will fire back. I'm talking based on my experience, if it is not done in a proper, transparent, and accountable way. At stake is the society we want to live in and pass on to the next generations, and we should never forget this. Digital technologies can strengthen our freedoms or oppress them. They can bolster participation or become a threat to democracy. They can empower people or push them to the margins of society. And I'm hopeful, and also I trust that nobody in this room would like to see the world in this going in this particular direction. It is up to us to steer them, not the other way around. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Dunya. Excellent keynote, thanks. And I do not want to break MC Rule 2, which means stick to time, but having this impressive foursome here on the podium, I think we should allow for just a few minutes for people to allow for questions, if you have any. If so, please make yourself known, use the microphones. Yes, please. You might want to put it on. Thanks.
Hi, this question is for the Commissioner. Obviously, you're supporting human rights, but in your speech you talked about putting pressure on the states themselves to control AI. And my question to you is your opinion, in an open society where the innovations are being made by private companies, how do you suggest the states work with them in order to control the negative side effects of AI?
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Thank you for your question. I don't think I said putting pressure. It is more for the states to really do what they have to do and really be responsible for everything that is happening, because elected governments are in charge of many issues in the society. And when it comes to new technologies, of course, we need to push for innovations, investments. But I think I stated very clearly in my speech that they should work with companies in order to make sure that everything they do, but also when they bring innovations and when they introduce everything that can be to benefits of the society, they should do it in a way that it is human rights friendly and human rights compliant. It is not an easy task at all. And I'm not saying this is something, and I have a formula. If I have a formula, probably I would sell it. But, this is something that is not, as I said, reinventing the wheel. It's a issue that can only bring more benefits to the society if it is done in a proper and transparent way. At the moment, I see many problems in many member states of the Council of Europe and beyond, when it comes to responsibility of the state and also the responsibility of private companies. But I'm sure there will be a discussion on this particular issue today. But not pressure on the states, just for them to do what they are asked to do when they were elected, for all the officials.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Rob. Rob Cherubino from CPC for asking the question. If no others, I suggest changement. Thank you very much to the panelists. Let's say a big thank you with an applause. And while you take your seats over here, you have seats reserved for you in front, may I ask Ambassador to come and moderate the session, and may I invite Ms. Mladenovic and my colleagues Valiant Ritchie and David Campion to come forward, and as well as Ms. Jeremy Rollison. Yes, to take. Thank you, Ado. Thank you. Yeah. All right. Yeah, there'll be some. Sorry, I didn't. Come on. Hey, yeah. Good, good, good. Thanks for. Come on, let's do that quicker, guys. That was. Huge amount of food for thought in that session. Now that we've had this broad, great overview, we like to focus on the key concepts, and the idea is to break this complex topic into slightly smaller pieces. And we'll start on a rather positive note, looking at some of the ways that technology is and hopefully will be used in the future by the OSCE and others to enhance security. And who better to moderate this session than the chair of our own OSCE Security Committee, Ambassador Luis Cuesta Civic of Spain. And let me very briefly introduce the ambassador, who before was ambassador of Spain to Tanzania, also accredited to Rwanda and Burundi, and to the East African community. That was 2012 to 2015. He was then the Deputy Permanent Representative of Spain to the OSCE for political military affairs from 2015 to 2019. And since April 2019, he's the Ambassador of Spain, the appointed Perm Rep, and as well the Chairman of the OSCE, as mentioned, Security Committee. Dear Luis, Ambassador, may I pass the floor to you to moderate the session. Thank you.
Do you hear me? Yeah, it's working. Okay. Thank you very much, Ambassador Becker. Thank you very much, Paul, for this very nice presentation. It is indeed a real honor to be here today moderating this session, this first session of the OSCE Security Day dedicated to technology and to technology for security. And the title already tells us something, the name of this session. I believe that we are all aware of the many challenges to security posed by the rise of new technologies, but I'm not so sure that we have talked that much about the opportunities that they also represent. And I think that the title of this session, Technology for Security, suggests that we also take a look at this, at the opportunities that new technologies represent. So to address this very relevant topic, it is my pleasure to introduce to you 4 experts on the field of technology and security. First, we have Ms. Stefana Mladenovic, who is the Special Rapporteur on Digital Agenda from the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly since September 2019. She has been tasked with examining the topic of digitalization. Ms. Mladenovic has been a member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia since 2012 and also serves in the Parliament as Deputy Chairperson of the Committee on Spatial Planning of space issues, transport, infrastructure and telecommunications. And also she has been the head of the Serbian delegation to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly since 2018. The second speaker, the second member of this panel is also known to you, is Mr. Valiant Ritchie. He's the Special Representative and Coordinator of OSCE activities for combating trafficking in human beings. And before joining the OSCE, Mr. Ritchie worked for 13 years as a prosecutor in Seattle, handling issues of sexual assault, child exploitation, and human trafficking cases. He also managed a public office in Washington State, which provided policy and fiscal analysis to the legislature. The third member of this panel, to my right, is Mr. Jeremy Rollison, the Director of the EU Government Affairs in Microsoft. Mr. Rollison's work focuses on policy related to the EU digital single market with a particular emphasis on data issues and corresponding public policy covering privacy, cybersecurity, cloud policy and the cross-border provision of online services. Prior to joining Microsoft, he worked at Nokia in the government relations team in the company's EU representative office and was previously director of the European Digital Media Association in Brussels. And last, but of course not least, Mr. David Campion, to my far right, Operational Support Officer at the CPC, at the Conflict Prevention Center here in the OSCE Secretariat. And prior to this assignment, Mr. Campion worked at the OSCE mission to Bosnia-Herzegovina as Chief Executive Officer and Head of the Director's Office at the Department for Security Cooperation. And before joining the OSCE, he served for 31 years in the Irish Defence Forces, reaching the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. Mr. Campion has worked with the Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine, coordinating support in a variety of operational areas. So after this general introduction of the speakers, I would like to maybe address a couple of questions to each of them so that they can make their introductory remarks maybe for 5-7 minutes, and then I will open the floor for discussion. And the first one I will address my questions to is Ms. Mladenovic. And since you are, I mean, a rapporteur on the digital agenda, I would like to ask you how you assess the impact of artificial intelligence on society. What are the real risks, and how do we make sure that the effects that it has on society will be positive? The technology trends are moving and are changing fast, and at this pace, I would like to ask you, from the point of view of the legislator, from the point of view of someone who belongs to the national parliament, but also to the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, if it is possible to follow up with the legal framework and the regulations.
Well, thank you, Mr. Ambassador. It is a pleasure to be with you today. This is my first time to be at the panel as a panelist in this capacity. It is a pleasure to be appointed as a special rapporteur for digital agenda. There's something that is new. It's new for OSCPA, it's new for OSCE, and I can say, same as Dunya Mijatovic said, we are pioneers in this area without any questions. You asked me about artificial intelligence. Is it fast? Is it faster than we can follow our artificial intelligence progress and processes? And also, I had the opportunity to watch the news a few days ago in Serbia, and there was a reportage from China where they were talking about visual reality. So it was for the first time that I was a little bit scared about digital as the sector. I prepared the speech, but if you allowed me, I would like to point out the few I think important issues here. So I would like after that to talk about others issues. Maybe the colleagues will have. Probably they will have questions on the topic. While I was searching for a real definition of technology, adapted the time and inspiration for the fourth industrial revolution, and I think that Ambassador Bochac said, or fifth revolution, on the revolution beyond. I have come across this statement made by President of France, Mr. Macron. He said that digital is not a sector. It is a deep transformation of our ways of producing, consuming, learning, and exchanging. Our whole social organization has been redefined by digital. And we can all agree with this closer definition of the term, but however, we should not forget that a famous writer, Harari, said that our world was created by accidental chain of events, and that history shaped not only our technology, policies, and society, but also our thoughts, fears, and dreams. And maybe this is a philosophical assumption, but doesn't mankind aspire to put theory into practice and having the largest fundamental discoveries where the results been the results of some dreams or fruits of imagination. The rapid advance of technology and the digital revolution is clearly already benefiting us in many ways. We can say that the new technologies gave us the tools, that we have made great opportunities for exercising and promoting fundamental human rights. Digital environment, as a new age base, gave us tools for wider public sector to raise possibilities and to be accessible to the individual, making common life easier with more active participation in developing regulations, procedures, and other public services, and also made more convenient ways of fighting against human rights violation. The uniqueness of OSCE placed this organization in the perfect position to address the challenges deriving from digitalization and to determine how technologies should be used, counter current threats, while at the same time respecting human rights and promoting democracy, of course, and security. The OSCPA is a forum of 323 parliamentarians from 57 participating states. As such, it represents probably a valuable bridge between the people and the governments in OSCE area on crucial topics such as those discussed today, bringing together hopes, fears, concerns of over 1 billion citizens. The emerging and fast-evolving implication of digital transformation are not only leading progress and prosperity, but also security threats and challenges, These challenges may derive from the kind of information these technologies are accessed. Another major risk is use of internet and other information and communication technologies for human trafficking and related crimes. The dark net and cryptocurrencies hold new challenges for public administration, such as money laundering and facilitating the smugglers of narcotics, weapons, and other goods. While some of the impacts can already be accessed, the implications of security are partly still uncertain, and that increased the tension of OSCE. I had very interesting discussion yesterday with coordinator of OSCE Economic Environmental Activities, Ambassador Žugić, about this issue, and following, of course, the activities of Slovak chairmanship this year, I am glad that OSCE had indeed already dedicated a lot of work and efforts to this topic, which confirms a crucial implication for security, and that will be also for us very useful. As OSCE Special Rapporteur, I was given the mandate by President Saratelli to raise awareness regarding the benefits and security implications in digital processes. This can be a great opportunity for OSCE as well. It can be part of our common positive agenda if we are able, on one hand, to foster creativity and innovation, thus attracting investments, and on the other, to protect our citizens and make them understand these benefits of the process. Thank you.
Mladenovic, and second panelist I would like to address a couple of questions to is Mr. Ritchie. We know that technology can have positive uses, and I would like you to first describe what might that look like in the context of a security threat like the trafficking of human beings. And also, trafficking human beings is often described as a huge international phenomenon affecting millions of victims, but also providing billions to traffickers. Given the limited resources available, can the OSCE and its international partners really make a difference in this field?
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. To talk about technology in the context of trafficking specifically, but I think there's a lot of lessons from the trafficking experience that we can apply to a number of areas. Trafficking in human beings fits squarely in this discussion of human rights and security because the crime violates the rights of numerous persons, but also constitutes a grave security threat. And what I mean by that is that trafficking can both be a cause of instability and also flourish on account of the instability. And that poses a lot of problems in terms of the rule of law, in terms of border security, in terms of human security. So, in the context of this conversation about technology, I think the crucial question is, what can we do about that? How can it positively impact it? One of the strong tendencies in this discussion is to gravitate like flies to bright light towards the discussion of fun tools. Right? We want to constantly talk about individual tools as if they are the panacea for the problem. And it's undeniable that there are a lot of tools. We did a project which we're about to publish in the next couple of weeks where we mapped globally over 300 tech tools and initiatives to combat trafficking. 300. Trafficking is still here. Those tools have not solved the problem. However, we know that there are tools for prevention, we know there are tools for protection, we know there are tools to help law enforcement, but I think we need to think a little more strategically and holistically about this. What I mean by that is exactly, Ambassador, what you just mentioned a moment ago, the tremendous scale. The biggest strategic problem we have in combating trafficking is the scale. Some 25 million victims, and yet less than 0.1% are identified. 99% of traffickers escape justice entirely. So that we have a massive scale problem, and what we need to do is think about how technology can address that scale issue in a holistic manner. One example of this is one of my favorite tools that was developed, which solves or attempts to solve the problem of child exploitation online, which occurs at a huge volume. And law enforcement can only really engage with one offender at a time, and that there are tens of thousands of offenders out there. So we worked on a project where we collaborated with the private sector on building a chatbot that can talk to those offenders, thousands of them at once, and pretend to be a child until the offender shows up to meet the child, and in fact it's a bunch of detectives and a pair of handcuffs. This is fantastic because it can operate at the scale of the problem. However, it's not quite that easy because there are a number of challenges, and this is where I kind of want to home in on. States don't do most of the development. The private sector does. In that mapping of 300 initiatives, almost all of them were created by the private sector, and most of them within a few countries. So how do you disseminate those tools? How do you engage with those tools? And here are the things that I think countries can do to try to accomplish that. The first is build partnerships with the private sector to foster trust and communication among the private sector. And the second is, as the Council of Europe speaker mentioned a few moments ago, clarify expectations around development, that certain negative uses will be anticipated and protected against by the private sector in the development of these. This is a strategic imperative. The private sector has the capacity, the resources, the skill, the expertise to develop it. OSCE is not going to build an app, probably, but the private sector can and can do it in a responsible way. The chatbot I mentioned a few moments ago was a result of one such partnership. I was part of law enforcement at that time. It was developed with civil society as experts, and it was developed, and this is totally an accidental, with volunteers from Microsoft who contributed their expertise, their time to build the bot, which was then used by civil society with expertise from law enforcement. This is exactly the kind of partnerships that we should be looking at. And another example is Technology Against Trafficking, a group of tech companies that are working on this issue who have invited the OSCE into their group to be a part of that discussion. However, again, I want to point out a challenge here. As the Council of Europe speaker said, there's a tension between security and human rights, and I think it even goes beyond that. There's a tension between the rights that we're talking about. There's been a tendency lately to favor freedom of expression over certain other violations of rights, such as exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And we have not yet addressed the tension between these rights and how to resolve that. And the SG invited us to be provocative, so I'm going to take that invitation and say I think it is worth taking a second look at the financial incentives of the companies doing the most talking around freedom of expression and looking at how we should really be balancing some of these rights. So the takeaways here, we need to think about what technology we need and strategy. We need to think about how we develop it in terms of partnerships, and we need to talk a lot more to all of the sectors involved. Thanks.
Mentioned the private sector and the need to build partnerships with the private sector to develop tools to prevent and to protect human rights. And precisely our third member of the panel, our third speaker in this session is Mr. Rollison. And I would like to ask you maybe, technology companies are clearly at the forefront of innovation and changes that improve our lives in many ways, from the world of work to entertainment. And at the same time, they are often blamed for careless approaches to personal privacy or taking too few steps to prevent abuse and discrimination. Can you describe how your company and your industry seek to ensure that the latest technologies will be developed and used in ways that promote rather than undermine human rights and human dignity? And also, I would like to ask you, how do you see the role of national governments and international organizations in creating a policy environment to promote ethical and appropriate use of new technologies? Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you for the question. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I think it's a great question to kick things off. And on one hand, as technology, someone had said it earlier, becomes more and more pervasive throughout all aspects of our lives, more challenges emerge, and there are exciting tools sometimes that we get excited about, and I appreciate the reference to some of the work Microsoft has done to address aspects of a particular problem here or there. But the more these problems emerge, the more we have work to do to come up with new creative and collaborative solutions. That's an exciting application that you mentioned. There's been news in the human trafficking space in particular about the ways AI can contribute to identifying and tracking this. But the statistics you mentioned speak for themselves. I think there's a long way to go before we get too excited about one tool or another. Microsoft has a large history with this type of collaboration, not just for one problem area, but we've had our digital crimes unit. We've had global diplomacy teams that have worked with governments around the world to address different cybersecurity issues. For a long time, when we think of security, we're thinking about those cyber issues. We were thinking about hacks, talking about botnets and ways that we were collaborating with governments to take down large financial viruses, botnets essentially, that go cross-border. We have teams in place to do that. We have access to terminal information that we can share with law enforcement. We have tools, in fact, that I would argue many law enforcement bodies don't have. But we can't prosecute the bad guys. We need to work together to do that. And I think there's a number of initiatives that we're proud of where we've come to some very good results with that type of cooperation and that type of collaboration, especially as so many of these issues go cross-border. It's been fascinating to me to see the way, and it was said earlier this morning, that criminals are often early adopters and fast movers in this space, and the ways that some criminals know that if attacks are launched outside of their borders, law enforcement internally has a bit less incentive to prosecute or pursue that. And cooperation's not always as good as we may claim, and I think we've tried to work more and more with law enforcement and governments to improve that cooperation and share some of the intelligence that we have, share some of the experience we have, and contribute some of those technologies. But that was more in the cybersecurity space. If we start to think now about the ways that technology is proven, because it's become so pervasive, to impact security more broadly, talking about election security, freedom of expression, the way that some of these words and tools can be used for much, much more nefarious purposes. I think as technology has improved, technology has expanded, these companies, we can get very, very excited about some of the new things we're developing, but with that, I think we acknowledge now more than ever the responsibility that we have as companies to do more in that space. And it's a delicate balance. We don't want private companies, I think, to become private enforcers. We hear that all the time. In fact, the policy discussions that I'm involved in Brussels, we have prosecutors on one side saying they don't want us to be private enforcers, saying no to certain orders. We have NGOs on the other hand saying we don't want Microsoft to be a private enforcer, saying yes to those subpoenas and orders. So we have a balance to strike, and I think it's up to democracies and governments to strike and set the line, but we can certainly contribute with the expertise and the experience that we have. There's a number of new spaces where this is becoming increasingly important. Artificial intelligence has been mentioned several times, and I think comes to mind right away. We've been one of the few companies and one of the first to come out and support and call for facial recognition technology regulation. I think if you look at the possibilities of that, there is some good, a lot of good that can come from that. And we wouldn't want to lose sight of the good uses those technologies can bring. But there's also a lot of bad, creepy, scary uses of that technology. And you wouldn't want market forces or profit incentive to move in the direction of accepting to build out some of those technologies that then create market advantages elsewhere. So while companies may not always feel comfortable with a particular application they've been asked to develop by one government or another, the reality is that there's a need to sometimes do that, to develop expertise to then bring to other parts of the market. I think we want to avoid such a race to the bottom with that. So we've been very adamant about calling for the development, particularly in Europe, which has an emphasis on some of these ethics and values and principles that we want to inject into policy around this, to come out with facial recognition technologies before it's too late. And let's admit it, it'll be much harder to bottle it back up later than to prevent some of those bad uses in the beginning. I think we can all agree on certain principles there as a starting point. But facial recognition is one clear area where I think we'd like to see regulation emerge sooner rather than later. But it goes broader than that. I mentioned electoral election interference earlier. The idea that actors could influence democratic elections leveraging technology, that's something that we're responding to with new software features, new contributions that we make to political parties and campaigns to help with attribution of these attacks. Once again, cooperating with law enforcement to be a little more vocal about attributing the sources of these attacks to the actors that we see via some of the access to those terminal points that we have. It's exciting to think, how we can contribute that, but it's scary to think just how much information is available and leads to certain actors with quite well-coordinated campaigns aimed at interfering in democratic processes. We've seen it in Europe, we've seen it in the US, and we see it everywhere around the world, essentially. We're contributing that with new security protocols and new programs that we can put in the hands of governments, political parties, election bodies, to make sure that we're trying to keep that aspect, which would arguably be one of the most important, safe. And we still have work to do. And then when we think about the ways that technology has accelerated and exacerbated some of the worst tragedies and crises we've seen. If you think of what happened in Christchurch, New Zealand, I think the way that technology platforms exacerbated that incident by providing a platform for a deranged individual to broadcast online all around the world. There's more commitments that companies need to make in that space, and we've joined that Christchurch call, and we've joined others to take on more responsibility to do more, to take down this content before it comes up. Valiant mentioned there's this balance between freedom of expression. I can certainly appreciate that, and I think it's a balance we want to be careful about, but I think now there's more recognition than ever that we have more responsibility in that space, not just Microsoft, but other companies as well. So this is a space that we're exposed to from a variety of our services we operate. We have a large footprint. People think of Microsoft, and I know they think of Windows, but we are much, much bigger than that in terms of the business aspects. And when you mentioned the quote from Macron earlier that this is not a sector, we're seeing customers across sectors going through their own digital transformations. And as we say, some of these challenges haven't really changed. It's that the attack vector has expanded tremendously. As we have more connected devices coming online, that's just more points for criminals to attack. There are security protocols, baselines, vulnerability disclosures, a lot of the themes that we've always talked about in a cybersecurity space that we want to build out. The question also came, what can governments do? There's a lot of policy that's focused much more on the cyber context, but now is coming into not just privacy, but what about skills? I think we need to see, whether it's through education initiatives, building out some of these skill sets. There's still a dearth of cybersecurity talent, particularly in Europe. I think that's a space that we can contribute more to. I mentioned vulnerability disclosures earlier, cooperations about what patterns companies are seeing, and across border in particular, and making sure we have those type of fora available to exchange that information. So cooperation, cooperation, cooperation. Staying ahead of the game as much as we can. From our side, internally, the type of changes we're making is putting in place internal committees that review contentious or asks from customers to develop certain technologies. It's really easy to get excited about what technology can do, but we want to ask the question internally more, what should technology do? And how should it do it? Facial recognition, I mentioned earlier, is a key part of that. We have a lot of contracts with governments around the world to develop technologies, large enterprise customers. But before our engineers get too excited about rolling out a new application, we want to make sure that we have committees in place internally to review that, to make sure it's not something that we wouldn't feel comfortable with from an ethical standpoint. And in the policy space, coming back to what governments can do, I think Europe is taking a lead on some of this, especially in the area of AI. Privacy and GDPR was one example of where I think we set a certain bar that looks like it is increasingly being emulated at a more global level. I think Europe would have an opportunity to do the same in an AI space and a facial recognition space in particular. So I'll stop there. There's a number of strands that we can connect on with this. I think it is exciting the way that technology can be a part of this solution, but I would never want to minimize the risks. And I think the statistics that Mr. Ritchie mentioned earlier shows that we still have a lot of work to do, and I bet the statistics are pretty damning in other areas too. But technology can be part of the solution, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. There's a lot of good uses that come from it, but it has to be a dialogue that we maintain so that we're coming to that right balance.
And The next speaker will be Mr. David Campion, and David has kindly offered to give us a short presentation about the way the OSCE is using technology to implement its mandates and thus to enhance security and respect for human rights, in particular focusing on the ceasefire monitoring efforts of the SMM, of the Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine. David.
Thank you, Ambassador. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I was in the Bosnia mission in 2013, and a box arrived from the Secretariat. We opened it with great glee. 2 iPads for testing from the Secretariat. One for the head of mission, and we fought over who got the rest. That was technology in the OSCE in 2013. Move forward to late 2014, and we're looking at a satellite image on a table. In wonderment, because none of us knew what it was, and we had to bring in outsiders to actually interpret it for us. And at the same time, trying to figure out what we were going to do with these brand new toys, our UAVs. Big, expensive, and wonderful. We had no idea how to employ them, how to use them, or what benefit we would get from them. So, allow me to fast forward 5 years. And Doug, yesterday when I sent in my presentation, called me and said, "You've got 20 slides. Can you get through them in the 5 minutes?" I think I can. Because in the last 5 years, and it's a realization that many of us don't have, the SMM has been a living laboratory for the employment of technology in the security zone. I've discovered, traveling to many conferences like this, that for the size of our organization and the size of our mission, we are way in advance of many bigger organizations in what we have. Satellite imagery, UAV imagery from big, medium, and small ones, cameras 25, a technical monitoring center in Kiev, monitoring those cameras 24 hours a day. All of these images, all of this information, every day, all day. Moving into information management and all the various issues surrounding it. But, as Valiant mentioned, there is no shortage of technology. There's no shortage of machinery. We have no shortage of imagery. The question that the OSCE is looking at is, what do we do with this information? What is the value of all this imagery? And how can we use it for good? The Ambassador mentioned ceasefire violations. Yes, of course we use them for ceasefire violations. And we use them for monitoring the deployment of heavy weapons within the area. But how can we use it for today's situation? How can we use it, or do we use it, to improve the humanitarian situation in Kiev? Now, there was a question asked during the week about the Secretary General's speech. Would the Secretary General actually say that our technology improves the lives of the people in Ukraine? I lost the argument, because I believe it actually does. I believe that every time we report a ceasefire, every time we report a heavy weapons violation, we are raising awareness. More importantly, every time we put imagery up of the destruction that's caused, the damage, people queuing at bridges, people standing in the cold trying to at least just get their pension, we are raising awareness of the issues that face the people of Ukraine. And if the information is not used for the people of Ukraine, well, then we should not have this information at all. This is a challenge that we're facing. How do we use this information? And as we move forward, it's a bigger question. As we get more, how do we store it? How do we analyze it? Who do we give it to? And what is the future use of it? And another future use of this information will in fact be when the guns fall silent. The information we've gathered on minefields, the information we've gathered on damage to infrastructure, the information we've gathered across the spectrum will inform the post-conflict rehabilitation architecture in Ukraine and will be useful. So yes, many of the issues that have been raised today about the use of technology, the employment of technology, how you use your information, are questions that we as an organization, the OSCE, I think have to face. I think that the SMM has shown that we, the organization, has been dragged very quickly to be part of the fourth industrial revolution and a lot further along the line than many. I think we have the opportunity to be leaders in this because, as was pointed out, it's not the technology, it's the control, it's the policy surrounding it, the policy surrounding the use of the technology. How do we use the information? How do we better use the information for humanitarian purposes? I actually believe that we could talk for a whole day of the Security Day on the SMM journey in technology because it's a good story and it's actually a better story than many. And I think in the future we're going to have to grasp it more, and I think we're going to actually have to put in structures in the organization to enable us to stay ahead of the game. Because the one thing that I learned most recently about the whole idea of technology is that unpredictability is the new norm. And if you don't keep up, you're way behind. Thank you.
Very much, David, and I really want to thank our four guests for this first round of presentations. I think that they provide a very good basis for our discussion this morning. We now have roughly 30 minutes, so I would like to open the floor to gather comments and questions from all of you. Maybe I would kindly ask you to introduce yourselves when you take the floor, since you may not be known to the rest of the audience. Also, if you try, I would kindly ask you to try to get to the point in your comments and in your questions. And I would also ask the speakers to try to condensate to the extent possible your responses so that we can take as many interventions from the floor as possible. And with this, would like to break the ice first. Is there anyone from the floor wishing to ask a question? Yes, Ambassador Raunic, I have already introduced yourself.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, just to help you out to break the ice, I have a comment that might not be that constructive, but listening to you and then also to the panelists before, I think the problem is not new. Technology is new, and the challenges are new because technology is changing so quickly. But the problem in essence is the same. What are we doing with technology? And how far can we limit the use or the impacts of technology? That's in the digital area, but it was the same question when the radio was invented or when electricity was invented. We always had, or mankind always had this problem. So I say it's not very constructive what I'm contributing, but just the problem, the ethics in substance, we're talking about ethics and how to apply them to our societies and to the rights of human beings.
Who would like to react to this comment? Yes, Ms. Mladenovic.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. Well, it's a good question, really good question. First of all, I think that there is a big difference between the period in end of the 20th century and this era, because the changes are much faster, as we can agree. So practically, I would also I want to agree with something that Dunya said about the frameworks. I think that we are maybe losing our time in discussing about making new framework instead of implementing the current one. And probably we could update our frameworks in the way, first of all, we need to understand new technology. And as a matter of fact, I believe that most of us, we are not experts and we are not scientists, but still we need to communicate with the science and we need to understand methodology and that methodology to put in current framework. So practically, I think that we are maybe we're really losing time about discussing about new framework. Yes, I think.
Yeah, just to add on to that and to echo some of the comments that were raised earlier, and in response to the point, I'm not sure that the problem right now is the technology. The tech can be developed and is being developed at a rapid pace. The problem is human. The problem is the policy question. And so it's funny because when you bring up the topic of technology, sometimes there's a question, well, what's the OSCE's role? Why are we talking about technology in the OSCE role? And I think the reason is because the OSCE has a fundamental role to play in the dialogue that surrounds developing policy responses. And that's really a central focus and should be a central focus for the OSCE's engagement on this issue.
I take the point. I think I made something similar earlier when we were talking about some of these problems are not new in certain contexts, but the way that technology has expanded so much, the scale is new. If we're talking about access to your personal information, there's more entry points to that than ever before. There's more actors who have an opportunity to take advantage of those entry points than ever before. So yeah, I think policy needs to adapt to that change in scale, but some of the security challenges, or at least some of the cybersecurity challenges, are not necessarily that new. It's just that the scale is much bigger. But that's in the cyberspace, and we think about the way that this is impacting human rights, then we get, I think, into, indeed, the human element that has changed to a degree. And, you know, where does this pendulum sometimes swing when we see how horrible it can react or result in certain contexts? I think it's the dialogue and the policy that needs to keep up with some of this. But I tend to agree that in certain contexts, the challenges are similar. The scale, though, I would say, is much, much greater.
I was at a conference in Madrid week before last, and 80 people from NATO sat around a table for 3 days trying to figure out how they would counter the threat from small UAVs. I mean, we're talking this size. And again, it's not a new problem, but it is a problem that is exercising minds. 3-star generals sitting around the table figuring out how we shoot down small drones, which cost €1,000 a piece. So it is becoming a bigger challenge in all areas of security.
Much? Yes, Rob.
Thank you. Daniel Barbary from the Canadian delegation. Mr. Rollison, I thought you had a very interesting point when you talked about it's not only about the tension between security and human rights, but also tension within human rights. Here in the OSCE, we have commitments on the interrelatedness and interdependence of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Maybe if you could elaborate a bit more on how you would view governments approaching this issue and how companies can feed into that, of how you make those decisions on when there are tensions, because I think you were being subtle about it, but there are oftentimes internal tensions within companies and profit-seeking versus maybe emphasizing one aspect versus another aspect. So should governments do this alone? Should they do it in cooperation with companies or consultation with companies? And how does that work in your view?
Well, it's not an easy question to answer. I don't know if there's a perfect answer, but I've been a part of conversations internally where, you know, we're a global company. Companies that may operate only locally, perhaps, you know, arguably have an easier way of addressing some of this. But there are different values around the globe. I think at Microsoft, where we've come from and where our footprint has been largest, you can imagine where most of our values would fall, but it can be difficult to roll out global products and services that adhere to certain value sets that aren't necessarily the same that are held in other markets. We talk about freedom of expression and we talk about responsibility of companies and proactive measures that companies can take to address harms. There's much different concepts of what those harms are in different parts of the world, and we have to be careful sometimes that commitments to take on more proactive measures in one jurisdiction aren't misinterpreted and abused to force us to take proactive measures in another that I don't think we would be comfortable with. And that's a dialogue that we have internally all the time. And at some point, you do have to draw the line somewhere. the part of the conversation that I think you're getting at is we are a private company at the end of the day, and we have shareholders to respond to, of course. But I think we tend to err on the side of where are these values held most broadly, and I think when we put the balance at a point, it has to be somewhere where we're comfortable with answering to everyone and comfortable with where Microsoft would be seen in that space. There are certain governments in the world who would love to see us develop certain technologies that we're just not comfortable doing, and we won't. There will be other companies that will. They will. And they may come back and be a competitor of ours in a local market then with a bit more of an advantage. So one of the calls that I was making earlier that I think helps address some of that is to develop norms in this space. We have example of security norms in the offline world that I think we could develop further in the online world. And we've been a key contributor to some of this discussion. It's the Paris call for peace and cybersecurity. That's gotten over hundreds and hundreds of signatures now. Governments around the world, private companies from across sectors. We need to see what the next steps of that look like. Can we move that to a space where we come to an agreement on norms? 2 years ago, it was our Digital Geneva Convention call that we were pushing. I think those type of conversations need to mature a bit more and continue to go forward. And hopefully we can come to a space, again, dialogues like these. Technology companies have to be a part of that dialogue, but norms are part of that answer. But naturally, there are different norms and different cultures all around the world, and everyone is coming online. But the more we can set a standard amongst those who see mostly eye to eye, I think we're optimistic and hopeful that that could become more of the global standard that addresses this in the more long term.
Thank you. Rob Arabino from the CPC again. Respectfully, I'd like to disagree with the ambassador talking about this being just a new technology. Technology is going to continue to evolve, and that's not the problem. The problem is actually the scale of the information that's being received. So when you look at the radio, it was just a transmission of a voice to many people, and they received it unto themselves. But if you looked at the slides that David had up, and you're talking about the dozens of technologies being used to capture that information, we do not have in the OSCE the human capability to understand all of that information in real time. So that information is being collected and collected to the tune of terabytes of data per day. So you need to tie in the AI, you need to tie in human resources to go through that data, to analyze that data, to reach a conclusion, to feed into the operations. We're talking just of the OSCE now, but when you talk about the private companies, how are they using that information? They are collecting that information as well. And again, companies have campuses full of just information. A human cannot do that. Thousands of humans can't do that. It has to go through computers. So that's the difference between regular development of technology and where we are today. It's the information that is being collected. And I believe for any organization, but specifically within the SMM, that's our problem. We have too much information. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to go through it in order to make the lives of the people on the ground in the Ukraine better? Sorry, Ukraine, not the Ukraine. But this is the point. This is where we're getting to today. It's not just technology, it's the information that we are collecting. Thank you.
Yes, I see here. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Veronica Ionescu. I'm with the Permanent Mission of Romania here at the OSCE. I have two questions, one for Ms. Mladenovic. You referred to the uniqueness of the OSCE to address the challenges derived from digitalization. And I would appreciate if you can develop more a bit on the way that states can do that, especially because we have the appropriate legislation, as it was also mentioned before. But we also feel that we need to adapt it to the challenges posed by these new technologies, and we also feel that the OSCE is well placed to do that, especially with the help of the autonomous institutions. But at the same time, I would be very much interested in hearing your point of view on that. And then, Mr. Rollison, you also mentioned skills, and I would be very grateful if you can also develop a little bit on how you would see training programs targeting officials, dealing directly with combating hate crimes, especially when it comes to the online part of their work. Thank you very much.
Ms. Mladenovic.
Thank you very much. We need a second to turn it on. Well, I think that we as a policy and public maker first need to discuss it with experts in science, and as I already said, we need to understand the processes. If we want to help, first of all, on national levels, to help to implement maybe new skills, as you already said. I really think that in the sector of human rights, we have, I can say, the best we can framework, legal framework, but we need to discuss it. As a parliamentarian forum, we had the opportunity to discuss about it, and we usually do it on our sessions, on our committees, especially during the annual sessions. And digitalization and digital agenda, as it is in this moment, is something that is discussing in all levels of OSCE. As parliamentarian, as somebody who is coming from, of course, national parliament, I can say that you need to promote idea of digitalization in your own country. But first, you need to have good connections with experts and scientists from your country, and of course to be part of that group that can show you and explain you how everything works. I'm not an expert, but I'm learning, and I'm aware that I'm going to learn a lot. And this panel is also interesting for me, and I would like to hear more about technology, and technology as one of the most important things today for our security, and that can, of course, be for us as policy makers crucial for the next couple of years in framework issues. Yes.
Like to answer the second question.
And I think there were two parts to the question. On one hand, or I'll address it in two parts. In terms of the skills that need to be developed, I think policymakers, governments, countries need to have access to talent in a security space if we're talking really about some of the technological impacts of that. So when it comes to national curricula that I think could increasingly need to emphasize some of these skills, that's one step. And then in terms of making sure that government officials, if you look at the way we've had to reorganize our sales force, in fact, for some of our customers in particular sectors, to make sure they understand how our cloud and our technologies can be used in a financial context or a manufacturing context or a health context. We're doing the same, and we should do more of that, and I think there should be an opening from the policymaker side to make sure that we're helping train those officials whose jobs are changing every year as technology becomes more pervasive. So it's a dialogue, it's a set of training, but it's making sure you have access to talent from the start, and making sure that the people that you have in place are as familiar as possible with the tools that they may have at their disposal and the way that these trends are constantly changing. So we have responsibilities on both sides. It's not just on governments, but we have some education we'd like to do, and I hope governments are open to that.
Helen Tisdale from the UK delegation.
Thank you, Helen Teasdale from the UK delegation. I just wanted to pick up on something that was said earlier. Mr. Rollinson, in response to questions about how you engage, and that you mentioned values, and you said that as a global company you have the challenges locally, it's easier, and that values may vary. I mean, that's what I want to challenge, and that values are universal. So within the OSCE, when we agree something, it applies equally to all 57 of us. We agree things through consensus. We have the UN system, and we have some really solid architecture on values. And so, and I do accept there is a conversation that values vary, they will be interpreted differently, but I think it's also risky. And if we retain a dialogue about universal values with sort of human rights and human dignity at its core as the place to start those further developments and further conversations about some of the potential risks, and also we recognise that, but framing it in universal values as the starting point. Thank you.
And I think I agree. I think what I was maybe getting at is, of course, our values and those within OSCE, it's still a conversation to have, right? And you have the conversation all the time, but we're largely in the same space. I think the challenges that we're talking about in this space go beyond the OSCE groupings and emerge from different areas where rolling out policies like this, that's what we do. We do stand on those values. The challenge becomes when you're operating globally in some of those jurisdictions that are not within OSCE and where some of these challenges also emerge. There are examples of where those values can be abused, right? If you're talking about proactive measures that we want to take in the context of hate speech, we have questions from other jurisdictions that say, well, yeah, there's a lot of bloggers that criticize this regime that we'd like you to identify and help us prosecute. And we know you're doing it in X, Y, and Z countries for these purposes. Why would you not do that here? And those are just some of the internal conversations around proactive measure decisions that we take that we need to be responsible for. But I don't think we're saying different things here.
Who would like to go next? Who would like to ask the next question? We still have 10 more minutes to go, so I think I can still gather 2, maybe 3 more questions from the floor. But yes, Ambassador.
My name is Philip Mcdonough. I was the Irish ambassador here before my colleague Kevin, and I'm here representing some academic institutions. I wonder, would the panelists like to comment on the question of inequality and whether the digital economy is increasing inequality, and is there any way of responding to that?
Yeah. Mladenovic.
Well, we can discuss about the influence of digitalization in that area. As you had the opportunity to hear, and I'm very grateful to Mr. Greminger, he mentioned one of supplementary items from the last annual session of Parliamentary Assembly. It was mine, and I was trying to promote digitalization as something that is positive, and positive effects of digitalization in gender issues. And yes, there is discrimination, but still I think that we need to find and promote the positive ones. And what was interesting, for example, in Serbia, because we had a transition period, lots of women under up 55 plus lost their jobs, and statistic shows that, unbelievably but true, in IT sector in Serbia we have more than 30% of women, and it was confusing even for us to understand what happened, how it's possible. Especially when we're talking about pay salaries, you know, that this is advantage, this is something positive for gender gap as well. You need to promote digitalization, you need to promote all skills, new jobs, new knowledges from this digitalization, and we had very good response of those women 55 plus. They went to some kind of new skills programs. organized by the ministries or municipalities. So practically we have very, very big percentage of women in IT sector because they recognize influence of it and they recognize that they can work in that sector. Practically, of course, we have also engineers as ladies, but these positive effects of whole digital era can be used and promote for example, digital gap and also gender gap, pay gaps.
It's a great question. I've been still trying to decide whether I think that in the context of human trafficking, technology is a net gain or a net loss. Because frankly, I'm not convinced either way. I think there's tremendous potential, but as was articulated earlier, tremendous harm. In the context of gender equality, for example, online platforms allow people who want to denigrate and harass and exploit women are growing and prevalent and facilitate that horrendous conduct to an alarming degree. At the same time, those same platforms can be used to promote the topic of gender equality, to promote awareness around it, to bring people together, to share stories and to have support for each other. So again, we're in this position where there's positive and negative uses. I think for me, the fundamental takeaway from this is that it would be a real mistake to think that technology somehow allows us to avoid answering these questions. That's the most important thing for me, is you cannot pretend that somehow you can avoid answering those questions because technology came along and fixed everything. That is absolutely not the case. And that's why, again, these dialogues between communities and sectors of communities are so important.
I was going to echo a little bit what Valiant said. I think personally I'm in a similar spot. But I think personally you can argue it either way. I don't know if I think I'm more on the optimistic side. I think their technology, especially over the past decade, has probably been more empowering than anything ever before, especially for underserved and underprivileged communities. You have avenues and channels to reach audiences and learn more and have access to help and services easier and more cheaply than perhaps ever before. I wouldn't even argue that. I think that's a fact. But on the other hand, these become used for much more nefarious purposes on a scale like we've never seen before, and can have exactly some of the harmful impacts that Valiant had described earlier. So it's a question about where the net is on that. Personally, I may be in a similar spot. I think I'm more on the optimistic side, but there's a lot of examples of where it lands on the other side, I think, for certain use cases, and those are where the challenges still need to be addressed.
Is there anybody else who would like to take the floor, make a last question or a last comment? Yes, see.
Hello, my name is Adesia Kompanits. I represent a think tank called Gagra Institute. And my question is, so what does prevent us from developing a framework for regulating digital area or technology and making sure that it's used for beneficent purposes? Thank you.
Would any of you wish to respond? Yes, Mr. Rollison, please.
Nothing is preventing us from doing that. I think we're already doing it. We've done it. We continue to do it, and we'll continue to do it. I think we have to be specific about the harms we're trying to address that emerge from some of these technologies, because as people said earlier, digital is no longer just one sector. It's not a sector. It's in every sector. It's all around us. I think we are regulating it, and I think we'll continue to regulate it, and we should continue to regulate it. We just need to continually look at the gap analysis of where our toolbox, our regulatory toolbox, may be insufficient for some of the more prominent misuses or harms. And that's where we need to be faster and a little bit more focused. Of course, you have to take a holistic view. I'd be the first one to say that. But I think we need to look at where the gaps in the regulatory frameworks are, where the harms are, and make sure that we're moving as quickly as possible to address those before they become too hard to bottle back up.
With this, we can close this session from my side. I don't intend to, of course, draw any kind of conclusions or any kind of recommendations, but if you allow me just 3 or 4 words, key words that I think, well, at least were key for me. New technologies bring new challenges and therefore entail new responsibilities. We heard about strategic thinking, about holistic approach, dialogue, cooperation, partnership with the private sector. Those were some of the words I took good note of, and I think are, a good basis for further work. And with this, I hand over to Ambassador Becker.
Well, I have nothing to add to what you're saying. Just to say a big thank you to you as a moderator, to the panelists, and for those of you who were so engaged and involved with lively questions. Thank you, and hope to see you back in 15 minutes. Please respect the bell. For coffee now, 15 minutes. And thank you to the panel.